Hey there, and welcome to this interview. So today I have Jake with me, and Jake is a former member of TBC, or Taking Back Control, which is the program that we run at Restored Minds. And Jake was, yeah, just gracious enough to come and wanting to share his story of his experience and kind of talk about his experience with going through the process, going through, recovery, all that other stuff. And so I wanted to really just give the space to you, Jake, today to really just share with everyone kind of whatever you want to share with them today, to be honest. And
Sure.
so yeah, no, so first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for doing this. I know this is and I know we were talking a bit before, but there's something very cathartic also about kind of like, just being transparent when we have certain struggles in life and not having to always put up this mask that I've always had everything perfect and there's never been any hardship. And there's almost an ease that kind of comes off your shoulders when you can just talk about it openly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely finding that.
Yeah, no, great. So, well, I'll turn it over to you. And so kind of just tell us a little bit about like where were you before you and I had crossed paths and you discovered TBC and kind of what was going on? What were you struggling with?
Well, so for me, I basically at probably, I don't know, a month or two after turning 18, I had a, trigger in an episode,
Hmm.
and it pretty much just felt like the world was ending, more or less.
Sure.
Like almost 24/7, heart racing, just not understanding any idea of what was going on. um, just overcome with fear. And, I come to find out much later that's, a pattern of behavior that I kind of set in motion my whole life. Before that is just kind of always being in my head. But
Yeah.
um, I didn't really understand what was going on. And after, a few months of suffering through this, I went to school guidance counselor and basically explained this, referred to a psychologist, and eventually came to find out, that it's OCD.
Mm,
um, and I got the tag, the Puro tag, myth.
sure. Yeah.
Um, but essentially, I mean, this was like 2000 and like mid 2000s. So
Okay.
like the awareness of some of this stuff, I think it was there, but I don't think it's anywhere near as prevalent as it is today, thanks to people like you. Um, and so really, I got a lot of well-intentioned but super unhelpful suggestions like, hey, snap this rubber band on your wrist every time you get an intrusive thought, which is a
Sure.
lovely
Yeah.
suggestion.
Good compulsion there. Yeah. And
Yep. Uh,
yeah, and
and
well, go back to you said something I just want to really emphasize. So you said like the pure OCD myth. Obviously I know what you mean there, but explain that if you could for a second.
yeah, sure. So yeah, the idea behind Puro is that essentially you're only struggling with obsessions, and
Yeah.
that doesn't consider the huge volume of mental safety behaviors or compulsions that you're doing,
Yeah.
constantly ruminating through things, checking, time traveling, all that kind of stuff, which, I was still doing physical compulsions. It just was stuff that was most people do,
Yeah,
like,
avoidance, right? Yeah, or like
yeah,
getting reassurance, Googling stuff, right? Things. And this is what's hard about, and I'm so glad you brought this up because it's like the myth is this idea that, oh, people with pure OCD don't do compulsions, right? So they thought, the myth was is that it was so difficult or nearly impossible to treat, when really it's like all they do primarily is just mental compulsions, or they do very what look like to be normal behaviors, but they're doing it from this state of fear, which is why it's a compulsion,
yeah, yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, and it was just all day, every day, just in my head,
Yeah.
just completely checked out of, I was like going through the motions of life, but it was like constantly just trying to get a solution to the quote unquote theme,
Hmm.
right? And that's another thing too that people struggle with, is this idea of like my theme, this theme, and it's like it's
Yeah.
all classic. It's all the same thing, really, when you boil down to it. It's
Yeah.
behaviors we're doing to try to
To
cope.
accommodate fear, right? And fear is just projected onto a theme at that time, right? And so
Yeah,
if we take the theme, we miss the whole boat of trying to address fear, right? And that's why it will just shift from theme to theme to theme in people's lives.
yeah,
So you're struggling with Puro, and sounds like for a while.
Yeah, long time. So yeah, and that's what I found. It would switch themes. So the thing, I had uh was kind of looping on for a long time, kind of resolved itself or whatever, and then on to the next thing and the next thing and then a couple things. And so I eventually left therapy because I just wasn't getting anywhere with it.
Yeah.
And I kind of was just lone wolfing it for 16 years.
Mm,
Um, so, I went through life, was by all accounts, I guess, by all accounts, like fairly successful, but getting degrees, traveling, doing quote unquote normal things, but again, largely just in my own head, constantly trying to, and this is where avoidance really started to creep in, as I was like, well, I'm just not going to do X, Y, Z. And I would start cutting pieces of my life out that were triggering me. I'd still have episodes
sure.
fairly regularly, um, but it was more like, oh, well, I'm not going to read this thing or watch this thing because it's just going to trigger anxiety. And I started making all these rules for myself about like what I could and couldn't do. And so it's like, I was going through life, but I was, relationships were often very rocky because I'd be doing all this reassurance seeking and all
Hmm.
this stuff, and all these other things. And so, eventually you got married and found out my wife was pregnant, and I was really like, I need to get this. I feel like I need to get this thing under control. Like I need to get
Mm,
better for you guys, but I didn't really know how. And I was in the middle of kind of a pretty intense episode, probably mid 2022, I would say, if I remember correctly.
hmm.
And I was doing some, Googling and whatever,
Googling. Yeah.
as you know,
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah. I know.
I, yeah, and I happened across one of your videos that's old, like probably from like close to a decade ago.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it was something about Puro, but you kind of just like casually dropped it because there was no context to it. Like I was just like, okay, I'll watch this. And there's like I didn't really understand the context to it, but there was something about like getting over it, and I was like, oh, like that's possible.
Mm,
And so I was like,
yeah.
that's interesting. Okay, so I was kind of like it was syncing up with I was thinking there had to be some way to make this better in some way, like manageable is really like I guess I should backtrack a little bit. I was trying to think, was there some way I could get to manage this as opposed to like getting over it, so to speak. So
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like I need to get better, but better for me meant like treat the symptoms and get it
Right.
at a manageable level. So that's why I was doing all that research. And I was like, okay, well, what are some coping strategies I can find? And what are these things that I can do to kind of alleviate the suffering? Because it's horrible.
Well, it's so
And
interesting. Sorry. No, go ahead.
yeah.
Finish. I just wanted to add something there. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say, but that like planted the seed. And I was like, oh, it's not, there's something beyond just managing it. Like you can actually recover from this. This is like, it blew my mind.
Mm. Well, and that's like, because I obviously have a very similar story in the sense of mine probably really blew up around the same time yours did, right? Around when I was about 18. And it's so interesting because, the like those initial phases of you seeking help, you establish so many beliefs, right, about what's possible based on like the first or second person you talk to. Because for the most of us, we haven't spoken to a mental health professional or psychologist or psychiatrist. So the first person that says something to you, or the first thing you Google, can really be established as like a limiting belief that actually works against you, right? So, like for instance, this is chronic. You're going to have this forever. Someone could tell you that, right? And then you could just enter in your life with that belief, right? And oh man, and then also the idea and the belief, and you're saying this so well, is like that the thoughts and feelings are the thing I'm trying to get rid of. That is the dis-ease I have, quote unquote. So that's what makes this a disorder. So if I get rid of those, I no longer have the disorder. The paradox is that as you try to get rid of the thoughts and feelings, you do compulsions and you get stuck in the loop, and the loop itself is actually the disorder. So you found me on YouTube, and then and reached out. So what made you, so it sounds like you had kind of a pivotal state of life too that was really feeling this, was this, I'm about to become a dad, right?
Yeah.
And do you think that was a big driving force of why you wanted to really address it with like a full head of steam at that time?
Oh yeah, 100%. I was like, this is, I need to be there for him. Now we didn't know because we wanted to be a certain way.
Sure. Sure.
Um, I was like, I need to be present for
Yeah.
him. I need
Well,
to do something about this.
and it's interesting because obviously, like, it was a long time for me before I got in front of someone who really understood what I was experiencing, and started getting even somewhat appropriate guidance. Um, but I do think I have learned that that really is a big predictor of someone's success on this path, is the motivation they have to actually get better. Right. And because again, this is an uncomfortable process, right? I mean, we need to be transparent about that. Like, there's nothing really comfortable about it. It's not like a pleasure cruise, but you understand that the value is in the long-term trajectory of doing this work, right? And in order to really invest your energy, time, and resources into something like that, you really have to have a high degree of motivation of why you want to do that. And this is why I think a lot of people are the trap that they fall into is, I'm going to wait until my life is how I want it to be, and then I'll do this, right? As opposed to realizing that my life is the way it is oftentimes because I'm stuck, and getting unstuck, getting out of these loops is going to be the thing that actually allows and opens doors and trajectories in my life that aren't currently available to me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I also fell into the classic trap. I reached out to you, I think at the tail end of that year, maybe early the year following, but it was, the classic kind of lone wolf thing, as I was just sort of piecemealing stuff that
Yeah.
I was finding online without any like coherent idea of what I was
Right.
doing.
Just
And
throwing
so,
spaghetti at the wall and seeing
yeah,
what sticks. Yeah.
yeah, and really what I was doing was just spiking anxiety, exposure and response,
Right.
exposing and responding. So I was just like, by the end of the year, I was like, I am getting worse. This is hard. Like, I need to find someone, and I researched there's, coaches out there and everything, but, I just felt like I really was drawn to what you were putting out there on YouTube. And I felt like this felt like someone who I would work well with,
No.
essentially.
Yeah. No.
Um,
Good. And then I always tell people that, like, I mean, number one, TBC is not for everyone. I'm not for everyone, right? Like, you are gonna you need to find someone that you align with, right? That's like a very important part too, like your motivation factors, and then just like general alignment. That's why, like, we don't just have this, oh, you want to join the program, you can join it, because like if there's not an alignment underneath the working together, it's, a lot of conflict arises, right? So
mhm.
finding someone you align with for sure is absolutely important, and a big part of it actually. So it sounds like there was a lot at stake in your life when you were really doing this work. Do you think that, I mean, to I'm gonna send you some praise here for a second, but I mean, you've done very well in this process, and
Thank you.
and gotten to points not where you just broke out of the loop, but then expanded your work on yourself beyond that, right? And then going to start the things that you're pursuing now. I mean, it's all really, really cool, really exciting. I'm very excited for your future. And, you know, what was it? Um, like, do you think that the all the stuff going on in your life allowed you to, did you find yourself investing more into it at because like than you had, because you had tried therapy in the past and stuff? Like, did you find yourself more invested, or like what do you think it was about the program that helped you really be so successful?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think first of all, understanding, like coming in and having the educational factor to begin with. So understanding like this is what we're doing, kind of onboarding,
Yeah,
and then getting a sense of like, here's your mind and here's consciousness and these other things, like understanding those concepts was really important for me at first,
sure.
because it was like, I just didn't know what
Well,
was
like you
going
said, a lot of us are just piecemealing these ideas together, right? It's like, oh, I read The Power of Now, and then I read this, and then I read, and you don't really understand how this all connects together, right? So you're trying all these techniques, and it doesn't all make sense because you're doing the wrong thing at the wrong time and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I thought, implementing it kind of in a step-by-step fashion. And then obviously, having group where we're able to kind of troubleshoot the experiences that we're having with yourself and with the other coaches who have all gone through. I think this is the thing too. It's like you've all gone through it. So
Mhm.
it's not this abstraction. Whereas like a lot of times when you're speaking with a therapist, they have sort of like this diagnostic manual. And I'm not like
No,
saying
yeah,
anything
it's
against that, but
true.
they just
It's
they
true.
don't know what it feels like.
Well, look, dude, it's like, and I say this to everyone, it's like, and I don't mean disrespect to therapists who haven't gone through this who offer treatment for it. Because I know some great therapists who have never had it and are able to really offer great treatment. But for the most part, the most the therapists who really seem to get it are people that have lived experience, and it's just like anything else. It's like you can get sound marriage advice from someone who's never been married. But someone who's been married that's also offering you sound advice, there's a certain element to it because there's the experiential component, right? They can be like, oh, when an argument happens, this, right? And someone who is never been married, um, that sounds great on paper. It really does. ERP sounds really easy on paper. But then there's
Yes.
then there's the nuance of implementing it, right? And that really comes through experience,
Yeah.
it's like, and to not have any to be trained in it by the book versus to have lived and gone through the process of recovery yourself, you're just going to have the nuances, a deeper understanding of the nuances, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. And that's like with some of the yeah, exactly those finer points, and then understanding like if you run into a particular kind of roadblock, what might have happened there, or even some of the aspects like um, I remember like at one point, one of the things that I had been kind of consistently being triggered by like didn't bother me anymore. Like
mhm,
like I wasn't getting a physical reaction, but
sure.
I still would kind of feel an urge like, wait, I feel like I'm supposed to do something here. And
Mhm.
just kind of talking through that and figuring out like, okay, there's still kind of different underlying factors. You might be trying to you're
Well,
not always just motivated by fear. Sometimes there's desire,
desire,
right?
right? Yeah, I remember this conversation very well. The one time we had it, where we're talking about the energy levels, right? And how you with OCD specifically, you don't just have the energy of fear, right? You also have the energy of desire that's very powerful for compulsions, right? And anytime we have a desire, especially to do things that are destructive, it's usually because we're trying to avoid a certain emotion, right? Or emotional experience, right? Or we're trying to run from it, right? So even the desire to go eat a bunch of sugar, it's usually you've had a tougher day in those days, right? Or you want to drink alcohol or gamble or do something that is you normally wouldn't do, let's say, right? So
Mhm.
that energy of desire is a different energy than fear, right? But then as you sit through the desire to do the compulsion and allow that to dissipate, then the fear generally comes up, right? And so learning to work through the, like you said, the nuances of it is so important. What so talk to us, if you would, like what did you expect coming into the program, and then what happened coming through the program? Like, did you get exposed to ideas that you never had been, like, that you weren't thinking we were going to talk about, or like talk about like just the general experience of that, what you thought was
Sure.
going to happen, what it was like, all of it.
Yeah, for sure. So what I thought it was going to be like is probably what a lot of people thought is like, I will be cured, right? Like,
Yeah.
and even though like I kind of had some understanding of that's not exactly what it is, again, through some of my like piecemeal research before, it's still kind of like, okay, well, I just don't want this stuff here. So like, how can I get rid of this
Hmm.
stuff? And then understanding ultimately that that's not really what it's about. It's about changing our behaviors and changing our relationship with our thoughts and our feelings and the sensations. And
And moving into higher levels of consciousness where you don't perceive this as even a problem to some degree,
right, it
right?
just becomes, yeah, like the idea of, you know, anxiety is more just like we talk about energy, right? It's
Right.
just this. these series of sensations were going on, but we're labeling it and saying it's bad and I don't like this, and
Yeah.
putting all those judgments on it, which is what adds all that stuff to it, and then kind of we feel like might drive us towards trying to alleviate that. Whereas if it's not a bad thing, it's just a thing,
Hmm.
even though it's often really quite uncomfortable, it does help you kind of be like, okay, well, it's a feeling, there's sensations, it's not going to last forever. You kind of and I think one of the other things too that was really appealing to me was the simplicity of it. Like, I'm not saying it's easy by any stretch of the imagination. That's where that motivation thing comes in, I think. But like the simplicity of it is where with the AAA response is like bang, bang, bang in this moment. Like, and
Hmm.
we have with this is streamlined. We don't have to get overcomplicated. This is what we're doing here. And then we're just, you know,
Yeah.
go from there. Um,
Yeah. And because as you like, look, if something's not simple, if you can't explain something simply, you don't really have a good plan, right? Like, I mean, if someone's like, if your plan takes, you know, 10 minutes to explain to someone, you don't have a clear cut plan of what we're doing, right? And that's the thing about the whole idea, right? As we learned and talked about in the program, is to we're doing all these compulsions in many ways unconsciously. We're not even aware that we're doing them, right? So instead of trying to get you to become conscious of everything you're doing and then stop doing all these things, it's kind of like by implementing this solution and getting that to the point where we're doing that unconsciously allows for that dissolving of that loop to happen. Um, so and yes, everyone, when you're first seeking out help, perceives the problem to be I have these thoughts and feelings I don't want, and I need to do something to get rid of them. Right. That's the big belief that actually keeps a lot of people stuck, because if you believe that, then what you do is you try to take every tool you find and try to make that tool get rid of your thoughts and feelings. Right. And people do that. And I talk about that. People try that with the AAA response too. But when you understand that the loop is actually the issue, and it's an energetic loop that you really get stuck in, that becomes self-reinforcing. So the more fear you're experiencing in the body, the more fearful thoughts come up, the more fear you experience, the more thoughts or the more compulsions you engage in. It just acts as a spiral. And when people say like I'm spinning out, like it's actually true, right? From like an energetic perspective, like this loop is just spinning. And when you understand breaking the loop is what allows the energy to then kind of dissipate, then allowing you to shift into higher states where you perceive something totally differently. It's like it's a completely different problem, right? So your understanding of the problem initially works against you because you're trying to solve the wrong thing, right? So that's a huge component of this program is really recontextualizing the problem correctly for people, right? Um, so what did you if you had to like talk about what do you perceive as your results from coming through this experience? And again, we had obviously the very hybrid experience where we have the program, the groups, right, our one-on-ones, right, things like that. But as you went through the experience and the various levels of interaction that we offer, I mean, tell me what you found beneficial. I mean, just kind of how we do it. Like, what did you see as your results from the experience?
well, I thought it was for me. I mean, it took me a while to get going just because I kept trying to get somewhere.
Hmm.
So a lot of at first was just like, there's nowhere to get,
Yeah.
first of all. Like once I finally that kind of clicked and it's like, okay. Um, but I think, oh, I mean, there were a lot of things in conjunction. So I think one-on-ones, yeah, having, as you said, I did the hybrid. Um, so we have some one-on-ones to have a little bit more extended kind of breakdown through things, but also having group, pretty frequently, so you can find a time or times depending that work for you to get there. And for me, a lot of it was, yes, specific questions that I had that were coming up, But a lot of times I called it like learning vicariously through others. So people had
Sure.
questions and experiences and things they were talking about that I hadn't thought to ask about, or, you know, there were things that I had questions on, but I wasn't necessarily sure how to frame it exactly. Um, and a lot of those things, and seeing where people are at, particularly often other group members who are, I would say, a little bit more proficient with the AAA and the skills, at least at the beginning, was also really helpful because it gave me something to aspire to, and I was
Mm,
seeing their results and understanding, and obviously the coaches and yourself, like, there's these examples of, yeah, this is possible, and if you
right.
just trust in this process, like you will, yeah, and it's not like, trust blindly. I think that it does a good job, as I was saying earlier, explaining this is why we're doing this. It's not just
Right.
like, just do this and shut up. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no, we do it for this reason or these reasons. And so that gave me some really good context. And then I was able to like understand. I've always done well when somebody explains the reason why I'm doing something. So
Sure.
for me, that's really helpful. But yeah, I would say
I
the
think
deep
I
component.
think it's for everyone that it's almost should be a necessity. Like you hear about people who
Sure.
just get thrown into ERP with no context, no explanation, and it ends up being a very overwhelming and counterproductive experience, you know? And that's why like
Yeah.
we don't even really talk about like ERP or hierarchies, officially until like, a couple weeks into the program because if you don't have the basic context of everything, you're not going to do it correctly. It's actually going to become counterproductive. Most people, again, Google ERP to do it totally wrong and think it doesn't work. It's like, no, it's like if you really understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and understand the correct context, it works because we all have the same type of nervous system as humans, right? That
Yeah.
said, so like, how would you describe your results in the program?
I would say, I would say fantastic.
And what does
You
that
know,
look
I
like? Like, how would you describe yourself before and after?
so before would be very, again, I guess you would say functional, right?
Mhm.
Working, married, so on and
But
so forth. But
but that's the trap. That's the trap. I mean, you're saying something so powerful. I want to pause you for a second because it's like we justify that it's not that bad,
I
right?
remember saying that to you on our intake.
Because
Yeah,
I do all these, accomplish all this stuff,
yeah.
so it's not that bad. I'm not housebound. I'm not. We compare ourselves to these worse off, but we minimize the suffering that we're actually experiencing because we compare ourselves to people that are just way worse off and justify like, oh, it's not that bad, right? And yeah, I do remember having that conversation with you. And so like, but anyways, please continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, no. But yeah, it was like, okay, well, okay, so what? Like I can drive to work and not have a meltdown, but it's like, I'm in my head all the time, right? So first
Yeah.
of all, I'm in my life now. Like that's probably the biggest thing, actually, above
Mm.
all else, is I'm through. We talk a lot about mindfulness and meditation as well, and those I I I guess I should put the caveat there too. They're not to be used like to get
Yeah,
something.
no. So we talk about that at the latter part of the stages of the program because they're meant in certain stages as like this is the use case is in these stages of your recovery, right?
Yeah.
So it's in the stage 4 state, right? That you would use something or practice begin to develop that, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And
but so
that
when you
was
say
good.
in your life, yeah, what does that look like? Do you feel more connected with your son or with your, like at home? Like what do you feel like when you say in your life?
Yeah, much more connected to, so I'm, first of all, there I have a ton more free time because I'm not just doing compulsions all the time. So there's
Yeah,
that.
sure.
So I've been able, we'll probably talk about this in a minute, been able to expand my horizons. But as far as the things just on a day to day, like I think I'm better at work because I'm attentive to what I'm doing. I'm not in my head's looping about what does this mean? Is my life going to end?
Thinking
This
about what
kind of
you're
thing.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah, much more connected to my spouse, to my son. When he and I are playing, he's 2. So when he and I are playing like little dinosaurs, like I'm there playing dinosaurs
Yeah.
with him and we're doing it. And it's just like so powerful.
But man,
Um,
it's so hard to really understand that until you experience that though. You see what I'm
yeah.
saying? Because you would have probably said, like, let's say you're playing with them before when you're in your head, like, no, I'm playing with them, I'm there. Right. But to really be able to dedicate your full attention and energy and awareness to something and not be in the mind about it, if you've never experienced that, it's a very difficult thing to understand until you experience it. Like to
Yeah, and it's
really be present.
yeah, and it feels it's like just very serene, you know.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, yeah.
and yeah, and I've been able to be, I would say, a lot more empathetic too, because I'm not wrapped up in my own, oh, I'm beleaguered all the time, and there's all, it's like I'm more attentive to what my spouse is saying and her needs, more empathetic with just my my parents, with but also strangers and people in the
Yeah.
neighborhood, and helping them out with things, and being more communal there, and also at a point where in our group, offering advice to other people who are kind of starting their journey,
Hmm.
and like really feeling like, okay, I've been there too, um, and saying and being able to kind of offer some things that I've noticed along the way. Um, I would say all those things, and really, yeah, again, just, but I would say that just presence, just like truly being there and not always future planning or time traveling. And it's an ongoing process. It's practice to continue
Yeah.
working on that. Like, it's not like I'm in monk mode all the time, right?
Right, 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 right.
Um, but the more, like anything, right? That's why there's skills. Like the more we practice it, the better we get it at that. And it's not just like
Well,
doing.
and when we get really good at something, we essentially can do it to the point where we're almost unconsciously doing it. You
Yeah,
know, like that's
yeah,
kind of the point of the AAA is eventually we want it to become almost an unconscious habit that we're just engaging in without thinking about it. Right.
yes, yeah,
And so in recovery really is something that you practice and get really good at, you know,
yeah, yeah. And I've
as a,
noticed, like,
yeah.
it's like, with that too, it's the, like, if it's a very intense sensation or something I'm feeling, sometimes it's how I might have to kind of like slow down and step myself through it. But for the most part, it's like it's just automatic. Like, yep, whatever. Yep,
Hmm.
maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just, uh, do your thing,
Right.
because that's,
But the confronting of the underlying emotion, I think is, really that thing that most people really struggle with, right? And it's like, and really confidently learning how to become aware of what's going on in your body and in a non-judgmental state and being able to really feel through it, is I mean, then emotions no longer run your life because you aren't afraid of them and you aren't reacting to them. And I think that's where big shifts really happen.
yeah, it's an interesting paradox too, because it's like you're less governed by them, but in some ways you kind of you feel things more too. Like, because a
Sure.
lot of times I would just not want to feel anything, because I'm like,
Sure.
well, if that's the price for me not having to feel anxiety, then that's
Sure.
fine. Um,
Yeah, and it is a paradox, right? Because you're right. Like you realize how much stuff is really down here that we've buried, right, over time. Um, just because I'm gonna have to again start group here pretty soon. The so what do you think? So like looking at your life now, having kind of just been away from the program for a bit now, kind of just living. Um, Tell us a little about what's going on and what you see as possible for you now that you maybe couldn't conceptualize back when you were like really stuck.
well, I think, yeah, I mean, I started a music website. I've been doing interviews with people online, on camera, because a
Hmm.
lot of I had these fears about being judged, and so that was something where I was like, well, I'm not going to put myself out there, because if I make a mistake, go to the catastrophic thinking, right? So
Sure.
this idea of like, well, why can't I do this? Why can't I explore this passion and give this creative energy, place that I can explore this, and not be governed by fear. So it's like, I feel like I've knocked down those walls, as far as like, here are these arbitrary rules that I've set for myself to prevent myself from feeling things or anything like that. And it's more like, no, I've got full permission to feel anything that comes up. I've got permission to, you know, uh, I don't have to do all these magic rituals to do things, and I can really explore things that I like truly care about, and really deepen my connections to give myself, but also just other people. And I think just it really feels like there aren't any limits as
That's
far as
great.
that's concerned. So it's very, yeah, it's very liberating. It's very empowering, I would say.
Yeah, no, and I totally see that with you, and just so stoked with the things that you're pursuing and doing in life right now. And yeah, it is. It's like I think what's hard is oftentimes it's not until you get on the other side of fear that you really realize how much it was truly limiting you because you justify it so much, right? And it's through the work of like the willingness to confront it, doing a lot of the work that you did on yourself, that you not only become really aware of how things were, right? Because I think that's when I look at my own past, it's like I knew things were bad, but when I really look at it, like they were worse than I thought, right? Like worse than I perceived. There's a lot that I was like justifying or kind of downplaying with how much fear ran my life. And then to getting to the place where that true commitment of like I'm not letting fear have a foothold here at all. Not only what opens up for you, I mean, I mean, you really can't comprehend it until you're there. You know what I mean? And that's why like I was so glad that you wanted to come on and share your story because it's like, I see that in you. I see the difference of like pre and post and watching like where the expansion is heading. And again, we don't know, right? Like we don't know where it's at. Like we don't know the limits because we can't. And even just the idea that you feel the endless possibilities available is really what we want on this journey. It's not really about getting rid of the thoughts and feelings. Although, yeah, sure, does that stuff diminish with time? Yeah, sure. But that's not what this is about, right? Like it's about like I'm ultimately steering the ship of my life and moving in directions that you truly want to go as opposed to just being controlled by the energy of fear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. That's the taking back control, right? It's
Yeah.
you, not fear, that's running your life. You're gonna
Yeah.
decide where you want to go.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for hopping on. And
Yeah, thanks for having me.
again, it was really powerful share. And then so I know some people are gonna really, really dig this and really connect with it. So I just want to say thanks for taking the time to share today. And then obviously we'll connect soon, but I'm gonna wrap up because I gotta run into group. But with that, I'll
Absolutely.
talk with you soon. All right.
Okay, very
All
very
right.
nice. Thank you.
All right. Hey, have a great day. All right. Talk to
You
you
too.
soon. Bye. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.